The industry is coming to an end.
I feel like it might be. But maybe everybody has always said that from the beginning of the photography golden era. Now this video is sponsored by Tamron and their brand new 35 to 150 millimeter zoom lens. This versatile zoom lens gives you an incredibly wide field of view while still offering a fast f2.8 to f4 aperture. This means that you can easily shoot both in low light, or you can blur out your backgrounds if you're shooting portraits. This lens is designed for both Canon and Nikon full-frame cameras and is mirrorless ready with the manufacturer's adapter. It has super fast silent focusing, vibration compensation that will give you sharp photos and stable video, and state-of-the-art lens coatings to keep up with the highest resolution cameras. Check out the link in the description below to learn even more about one of the most popular lenses Tamron has released this year. So Pi, is the state of photography changing unlike it's ever changed in the past, and there is the most amount of evolution happening right now? Or is this something that people like us have been saying generation after generation after generation? What are your thoughts?
I remember going back to my mentor, John Solano, and I remember that whole transition from film to digital.
Yes.
There were meltdowns happening. I mean, people were just like losing their minds over the end of the photography era as they knew it.
Okay.
And I do think that, in some contexts they were right. So looking back, very mediocre photographs were kind of the standard. And then as it went into digital and kind of democratized production,
right,
and everybody got cameras, it kind of raised the bar. So in one way, it was the end of this kind of crappy standard of photographs that everybody was producing.
Right.
It lowered the difficulty level and brought in, but in another way, it expanded the industry far beyond where it was, where amateurs would never pick up a film camera and never do those things that they would do before. So, and on one side, I feel like it expanded everything. On the other side, I feel like for them, they saw it contracting.
Yeah, so this is a conversation that I've wanted to have with you, because Lee and I debate this on a weekly basis maybe, and I know we all go to a lot of conventions and a lot of trade shows, and we've seen this firsthand. And I think what you're talking about here is the transition from film to digital. The biggest thing in that little era of photography is the barrier to get into photography was completely destroyed. Before, you had to invest in film and you had to have this knowledge and you couldn't really see what you were doing, and it was kind of mystified. And because of that, I feel like the photography industry, at least in the wedding side you're saying, probably didn't grow all that much, because you just had your one way and it was a safe way and you knew the secrets that nobody else knew, and it cost a lot to get into it. Whereas now with digital photography, it's so easy for anybody to get into it. And then more importantly, it's so easy to learn and push yourself as an artist, because it literally costs nothing to take pictures and to practice your craft, where before, that there was a financial barrier.
Well, and even on the commercial side or the editorial side, when you looked at name any famous photographer back then, if you wanted to match their level of skill, you were looking at dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of 10 years to try to learn.
Right.
So it just completely changed the learning curve, where now you could run to Costco and grab a camera, and you're not going to be good, but at least you could speed up the process of failing until you get to that place.
Maybe this is a conversation for another time, but this is always my argument why in college you should not be learning on film. So many people make that argument, and I think, why would you do that? Go back and learn on film once you have an understanding, but it's so much cheaper and faster to learn on digital. And then if you want to do it the right way or to explore, I know film has its place and I enjoyed going into the darkroom, but when it comes to perfecting your craft quickly with the least amount of investment, digital is by far the way to go.
100%. I agree completely. And if you just look outside of photography in general, if you're learning anything, whatever it is, a new sport, maybe it's kiteboarding like Lee, the whole goal of anything that you learn is to maximize the number of repetitions in the shortest amount of time, fail as much as possible without injuring yourself or without making it so you can't do it anymore, but being able to continue and do that over and over and over until you get good. How would you pick up a film camera today?
You'd have to wait at least an hour.
Yeah, it's the most asinine thing. If someone's going to learn film,
you have to keep a journal
versus someone's going to do digital, I'd be like, dude, well, the digital guy should teach the film guy how to do it once they finish, and then
It's funny because you upload all these pictures and you got the EXIF data, and you can revisit anything and it's right there embedded. But before, you'd have to like write down what your settings were and what you did. It's kind of crazy to think about. But I guess where I want to steer this conversation is all of this that we're talking about requires a big skill set, but at least what I've been seeing in the industry is a lot of things are falling to the wayside. I feel like less photographers are using strobe. Many photographers we've met who have millions and millions of followers on Instagram, have huge portfolios of amazing work, have no idea how to use flash. They have no idea what a sync speed is. In many cases, they don't even know the intricacies of their camera. It's kind of what you see is what you get, and then we edit in Photoshop. It might even be editing on the phone now. I know we've done videos on how great the new iPhone is, and people say, oh my gosh, it's not a professional camera. But the industry, at least from what I'm seeing, it's moving more and more towards phone photography, or at least snapshots on a pro camera and then edited very quickly and then posted online. And I'm starting to feel like, am I the old guy now who used to do it the old way and that's not the way that's done anymore? Or is the industry really opening up and we're valuing things in a completely different way?
Man, there's so much there to unpack. So, number one, we've seen this personally kind of unfolding right in front of our eyes. As you go to like an event or trade show, we went to one that was lighting focused.
Right.
And there were so many successful professionals there at a lighting focused event where it was all about professional lighting solutions. Who had,
using strobes. Using artificial light.
Who had literally never picked up a flash. But you wouldn't know that from looking at their work.
No.
So we're getting to this place where, like, in the previous generation, the people that kind of like taught us, I feel like they very much hounded that there was a right and a wrong way of doing things. And I think in my generation, or in this current period, I've learned that honestly, it doesn't matter how you get to where you're going to go. Like, all that matters is that final image. It doesn't matter how it was lit, what it was shot on.
How much it costs, how much time and effort.
Nothing.
Right.
Nothing but that final image matters. And other things are starting to get valued so much more. So like, in the past 10 years, maybe certain things like, lighting or unique post-production skills were very much valued in the photographs. But as we go forward, it's almost like the ability to share and engage an audience is becoming the photographer's job.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like that's a marketer's job, but that's right. It's blending into what we're doing. So if you're looking at it in the past years and saying like, hey, you know what? My job is to take beautiful pictures and it's to light them and it's to do this. I think we'll get stuck in the mindset of the film photographers who are like, it's not my job to learn post-production. It's not my job to do all these things that I never had to do before.
Yeah.
I just need to take the picture. So I feel like those that embrace this shift and say, you know what? Marketing is now part of my thing. Social media and all these different things is now part of my game. They're going to do great.
Yeah.
And the ones that don't embrace that are going to be the grumpies of today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you go back and you think how the industry worked just 10 or 20 years ago. I think it was very compartmentalized, and there was an agency, and they hired a film operator, a photographer, and then you had to know how to use the camera and to get the aesthetics, and you do the strobe and set the white balance and the color and all that stuff. But then it kind of moved to where you are now the creative artist, right? You have to come up with these great ideas and be able to pull them off. But now it's getting to the point where you have to do everything. You have to know how to operate the camera. You have to know how to produce the great idea. Yeah. But even further than that, it may not even be about the agency. You now have to have the reach, and you have to have the followers, and you have to be able to put an image out there and it goes semi-viral from your own doing, And that's how so many people are getting hired. What I think is interesting about all of this is, at least what I see in our community and I see on other big photo communities, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong or if you see something different on yours, but when I look at Instagram, I look at Fstoppers, so many images are shot in such a similar fashion. Mm-hmm. Everything relies heavily on post-production, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I edit my images like crazy too, but everything's turned into this like surreal look.
There is, yeah.
And when you look at photographers from the 80s and 90s and even 2000s, everything was flash and freezing action and crazy production and huge sets. And now I just feel like so much of it is just, it's boiled down to a level where a lot of times it's just a pretty girl or it's a pretty location and it's this beautiful Photoshop hyper-realistic thing.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, is that where everything is going, or is that just the trend we're seeing today? When you see the Greg Heislers who can light a scene with, 3 or 4 strobes and make it look unbelievable, or the Joe McNallys, or any of these guys that were very heavy on getting it right in camera. Mm-hmm. They would do the stuff where the guy is jumping in the air and he's frozen, and it's, a lot of them were Sports Illustrated photographers. Mm-hmm. They had to know how to strobe and use fast shutters and freeze that action. And I wonder now if the skill set of the modern influencer even can do that. And because of that, is the genre of photography itself changing?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I would think I see these, we all see these cyclical trends that come and go. And usually when those trends come in, oftentimes it's a really cool style or stylistic effect.
Right.
That then gets kind of like overused for a time period. And then after that time period, it remains a niche and a style on its own. And it continues. So I would say dramatic fashion lighting is still a niche on its own. And it's still used quite a bit, even though it might not be what's trendy right now.
Right.
So there are things that go out of style, like the 80s glam. Remember the 80s glam where everything's like that soft focus,
Sure.
That stuff actually legit can go out of style.
But there's a lot of elements from the 80s that are back now,
There are. Like those, there's a lot of gelling that's going on now.
Color is really popular right now.
Where the colors are being thrown back to those 80s magentas and purple vibes, and that's totally coming back.
What is the new punk, where it's like the Tokyo neon?
It has this kind of anime kind of feel to it, where it's elements of the 80s combined with like modernism and I think you'll always see that. And right now you're right, it is 100% very, very popular. But I think over time, it's like HDR. You remember HDR 5 years ago?
Yeah.
And it was all you saw on the internet was just bad HDR. Everyone's trying to be Trey Ratcliffe.
Right.
But people like Trey who make that their niche, that focus on that, I feel like there's always going to be a place for it. As long as it's not that gaudy over the top, just why are we doing this kind of stuff? I think there's always going to be a place, but it's going to shift and keep shifting.
Okay, so we're talking a little bit about the aesthetic of an image, but I think we could dig even deeper to where we talk about the quality of the image. Because I'm convinced in the not so near future, maybe everything is shot on phones. I mean, already the iPhone is the #1 camera in the world. It produces more images than anywhere else. I feel kind of like the MP3 did towards, analog recording.
Yeah.
The quality, I feel is going down to some degree. Of course, we have 50 megapixel images, but I think a lot of it is everything's so digestible and we need so much media so quickly that if you talk to the advertising agencies in New York, most of them will admit that we're not spending the same money on the campaigns we're doing. We're not necessarily hiring the most experienced photographers that we used to. We're giving many more people a chance that we would have never given a chance 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's much more experimental. And I think they would even admit that the quality has dropped to some degree.
For sure.
There's a big trend in just having normal people. You're not hiring these super professional models anymore. There's this realism, which is cool. It's a cool movement that, the general population wants to see people like them in advertising campaigns. But at the same time, I don't know, when you think that DSLR sales are at the lowest ever and mirrorless is kind of the next thing, but in general, I think a lot of these cameras that we all depend on could be on the way out. I'd love to know what's going on with some of the strobes,
So that's the...
Flashes could be selling at an all-time low. I don't know if that's true or not.
No,
There's
for sure.
more people doing photography, but when you see the images and the way people are producing them, it's a very different system.
And I think that ties into the biggest kind of overall fear that is kind of pushed around the industry, which is we're all going to be out of our jobs.
Right.
That's where everyone kind of sees things going as cameras are going to take over our jobs and we're no longer going to need photographers or cinematographers or anything, because just this tool can do it.
Right.
But I kind of argue against if if the quality of an image was your job, then you're 100% correct. That if the quality image was what you did as a professional, then you're already overwritten, right? You're already done, you're kind of out. I kind of come from a place of like, look, your job is gonna be safe and intact if quality is only one small facet of kind of what you're doing. So like for me, the overall client experience that we aim to deliver with our commercial and our portrait clients has nothing to do with the quality. Like nobody ever asks what resolution we're shooting in, what camera we're using. I'm talking on like commercial jobs. Nobody ever asks those questions, let alone a consumer and client who's hiring you for portraits. They're never gonna ask those questions.
Right.
But how many photographers are just like, got a stick up their butts about how much resolution they got, or what's too much and what's too little, and what lenses I need to get certain shots. Instead, we're focusing on a business, in our business, we're focusing on like, what is the actual client experience like? Like when they contact you, what does it feel like when you first reach out to them? How does that conversation go? How do we understand and interpret their needs? How do we take those needs and then turn it into a product?
Right.
How long does this time period take? What is the level of convenience in there? Is there friction in this process? Like, those are all the pieces that go into, and I would argue that that's 70, 80% of our product. 20% and the given side of it is the, do you take good pictures?
Right, right.
Would you ever walk into like a Bentley dealership and be like, what kind of leather are you putting in this Bentley? Like,
no, but I think I would expect it to be at the highest level.
you would expect
still.
it. That's 100% you would expect it. But that's what I'm saying is like you would expect that, and that has nothing to do with why you're there, the reasons you're there, or any of those things. So it'd be like saying, oh my gosh, in 2 to 3 years, everything's gonna be about like, there's a new leather that is softer and silkier and smoother and it's cheaper, and every Bentley is gonna be not even worth having because this new leather and this new like cushion and everything like that is going to make these cars so much more comfortable.
I see what you're saying. I think there's just a lot of weight behind the word photographer or photography. And when you think that we could be coming to an age soon where being a photographer now means not knowing how to use strobe, not knowing a lot of the technicals of a camera, doing a lot of it in post. Like, I mean, we just had a competition where you shot a natural lit shot, and this happens all the time, where you underexpose the image like crazy and you get as much information within the histogram, but then in post, you're able to make it look like it was professionally lit, but it's just dodging and burning. Mm-hmm. And I think traditionally that wouldn't necessarily be looked at. It's kind of funny. 50 years ago, that would still be in the dark room, you're dodging and burning. Yeah. But then it got to a point where I've heard a lot of really famous photographers and other people in our industry talk trash about photographers who shoot natural light and underexpose and then bring back all the detail in post. Yeah. You know, but that's kind of where the world, it feels like that's where it's going towards. The idea of using a fill light or even a reflector to pop in a little bit of light is almost, at least it feels like from my perspective, it's dying to where you can do all of this now in post. We have a buddy who is convinced in the next couple of years, you're going to be able to open up an image in Photoshop and tell it what lighting you want. I mean, the iPhone's kind of already doing this, right? Mm-hmm. You do the stage lighting and everything, but it'll get to a point where you can say, I want the light coming from here, and you have no idea what that means, but you just are going to get these hard shadows, and it's all going to be done in post. And at that point, it's almost like we need another word other than photographer. You're not really even following the same rules. You're not seeing light. That's another one we always talk about. You got to learn to see light, but when you can just put somebody in the shade and then dodge and burn them to make it look like whatever you want, you're almost more of a painter now. At least that's what it feels like.
So I have a very different take on this stuff, and maybe it's because before I was a photographer, I was a business person.
Okay.
So I kind of like took the business mindset into the world of photography, and I look to simply create a product that clients like.
Yeah.
And to me, it doesn't matter like how I get there at all, one bit. And to be honest, I'm not even a person that understands necessarily the elitist, because there are a lot of elitists out there that have very
there's
strong
like a scale,
opinions.
right?
They have very strong opinions about what is a photograph, what isn't a photograph, what you can do and what you can't do. And to each of them, I would say like, hey, you're missing out on a whole boatload of stuff that's just going to fly by you.
Right.
So from my standpoint, it's like I have a hard time believing if Ansel Adams was a down-to-earth person and just wanted to create the best photographs possible, I have a hard time believing he wouldn't be using Photoshop.
Yeah.
Or be using Lightroom, or be using whatever it is. Anything that could get him to his, like he used the darkroom. I would think all of these professionals used the darkroom because they had to. But once there were better tools available, would they be kind of like staunch a-holes about it and like say, oh no, we got to stick with the darkroom? Or would they be like, no, there's better tools that can help me get where I'm going.
Right.
Let's use this. In the end, when you pick up a book, we have Mike Kelly's book on the table right here. Nobody who buys this book, other than a photographer, everybody else who buys this book because they appreciate the architectural photographs,
Right.
would simply be looking at them to see Mike Kelly's eyes and his vision and what he sees for each of these images. They don't give, pardon my French, a rat's ass about how it was shot, the way it was post-produced, any of those things. And I feel like it's important to remind photographers about that because they forget, and we start shooting for each other. We start making each other like our end audience.
Yeah.
And yet you would never hire me to do anything.
Yeah.
Well, you should. Like maybe you would. I don't know.
Well, after this last photo shootout,
You would definitely hire me.
I would definitely hire you. Yeah, I would be the last person to hire. I lost. You guys haven't seen that? Go to our channel. You can watch it. Came out a couple days ago. I totally agree. It's just weird to be in the industry and to try to hold up photography and to you hear one side of the spectrum that's like it's got to be done all in camera, and then the other side of the spectrum, which I don't even think they have as big of a voice, but they have a bigger movement, where it's just getting the end result. And if that's shot on a cell phone, or if that's shot on a Sony A7R III with a prime lens, and it's the only lens they own, it's definitely interesting to see the arguments that people make online.
Yeah, I mean, there's that whole. Honestly, I don't think the term matters too much anymore. But there's a whole section of photographers now that just take 6 different images and composite them all together, and they're not even their photographs.
Yeah.
And sometimes they call themselves photographers, sometimes they call themselves graphic artists. But I don't know that the distinction is important from the agency's side. Like the agency's going to see their work, be like, hey, they have a good following, they do good work.
We want that.
We're going to hire them. They're not going to be like, oh, but technically they're not a photographer, or technically they're a graphic artist. Unless specifically they're maybe marketing something for photographers. But
yeah. I think it just goes to show how much information and how well-rounded you need to be now to be a photographer. Because we know photographers that we're friends with that are from the old school where they show up and shoot the campaign, they dump the raw files off, and the agency does everything. Yeah. And you look at their pictures and they're shot pretty flat, they're pretty simple, and then you see the movie poster or whatever it is and you're like, oh wow, like that's incredible. Yeah. And I always remember thinking like, oh my gosh, that photographer is amazing because they have this big campaign.
Yeah.
But then when you see what they were actually hired for, they were just hired to kind of operate the camera and to bring their expertise in with a large group. But now it's completely changed. Now you need to know how to post-produce. You need to know how to edit and composite and pull the most dynamic range out of an image. And then going beyond that, you now have to be able to put that image out there and have it get traction. Yeah. Have it get a following and get the likes and get the people to talk about it and everything. And I think that's this new wave of influencer that's coming that, how many times have you heard people who we have articles in Fstoppers all the time and people dismiss the idea of influencer, but I think that's the next, it's not next, it's now. That's almost what you need to be inside this industry, Obviously, if you shoot weddings, that may not appeal. A following helps you gain clients maybe, but you don't have to have 1 million followers to be a great wedding photographer. But when you start doing some of these other things where you're trying to sell, it's like if you're a commercial photographer, that's kind of part of it,
Well, I think what's going to happen is I'm really hoping the term influencer gets dropped because I think it's the stupidest term in the world.
Right.
But whatever that thing is, honestly, you are a content creator. So you're not. I want to give you an example of this. A friend of ours that we happened to meet up in Alaska, Brandon Wolfel, very famous photographer, 3 million followers on Instagram, great guy. When you look at the way that an agency would approach him to advertise, they're going to look and say, who is Brandon's audience? because they're approaching Brandon as a personality, as a content creator, as somebody who's, I don't think the word that they're thinking of is necessarily photographer. He is a photographer, but I don't think that's necessarily what they're defining him as.
Yeah.
They're looking at him as almost like a television channel or a YouTube channel or anything else, an outlet to create content. And they're gonna place advertisements on his network, or they're gonna hire him to do things that are gonna be marketed towards those types of people that are following him, which I think is why everybody's so up in arms about Profoto hiring him to do the C1. Like everyone's like freaking out about why do they hire, Brandon to do the C1? But it's kind of a great move because the C1 was never designed for a professional photographer.
Right.
It was a device, and you can say whatever you want about the price, you can say whatever you want about whether it's, I don't care what you want to say about it. It's designed for consumers that have money, but consumers, to be used with your phone. And they looked at the photographer that they wanted and they said, he has the right channel, his audience is the right person to hire to market towards. Yeah. They're treating him like they're going to treat all of us like a television channel. And they're going to, maybe a television show.
Yeah.
And they're going to place the appropriate advertisement for your show. And I think that's the key way of looking at it. Now, one of the things that you mentioned too about these photographers that get these jobs, these bigger jobs that come in, they come and just take a picture and they go and deliver. We all look at that and say, I could have done that.
Yep.
Like that's the first thing that somebody says, I could have done that. But there was something that Lee brought up yesterday during our challenge where he was like, Pi, the way that you communicate with your subjects, your models, the way that you pose, direct, everything, he's like, it's so different. It's so different than what, I see other people doing. That is a huge part of my product and what I do is the way that I communicate, the way that I pose, the way that I make them comfortable, the way I create images, and the way I can kind of guarantee the same kind of consistent product and result. That is as much of my product as anything else. And I would argue that that's what an agency is hiring in like somebody that shoots for movie posters. They have an ability to put celebrities at ease while also being able to operate a camera and get the image that they need on a consistent basis. And that's what's being hired, not their ability to technically light a photograph. Again, it's like looking back to what's actually being hired, what you're getting paid for. It's not what most people think it is. Most people just see the result and they're like,
yeah,
very judgmental based on the result.
Yeah, and we did this tutorial with Monty Isom on the business of photography, and I would say the biggest thing I gained from that, besides all the contracts and licensing and how to navigate your way through the numbers, is just how much of a hustle it is and how he is getting hired. It's because he's able to build relationships and he's able to make people feel a certain way when he's in their presence, and he's able to connect other people for jobs that he's not even a part of. And it's like a favor, and it's all of this deeper level thinking that isn't about photography at all.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing you're talking about. Like the reason that you're hired is, I know you shoot weddings primarily, but you do some commercial work too. But you're hired because when the couple walks into your studio, you made them feel a certain way. You connected with them a certain way, or they saw you on the day of one of their friends' weddings, or maybe they were in the wedding party during one of their engagement shoots or something. And they just saw the way that you work and you put their mind at ease. And really, at the end of the day, that's what you're selling. You're selling the networking. You're selling the way that you communicate with your models. It's the way you run your photo shoots. I think kind of gone are the days where the photographer shows up with the ego and he just like, it's got to be my way, and there's still photographers like that at the highest level.
Yeah.
And you're hiring them more or less because you want to hire that guy's name.
Yeah.
Not because you need his, methodology
for sure
to get the image. But I think a lot of photographers still struggle with the idea that like I could have taken that, And it's like the shoot off we just did, like I don't think any of us are super proud of the 3 images that we produced. And we had 5 minutes to, take those images, but it's one of those things where like I think every image we made was a consistent image, I don't think we struggled too hard. Maybe we didn't push ourselves hard enough, but we're able to produce over and over and over again. And that's something that even in our critiques, we can't talk about that enough,
Yeah.
That anybody can make a single great image. Anybody could post-produce a single great image. But to be able to do that consistently over and over and over again, I don't think that gets talked enough about, and on our channels or in the industry in general.
You know what is such a great example of this is the royal wedding pictures. Remember the engagement photos from the royal wedding? I looked at those and I thought, these are fantastic. Like, they were great photographs.
What was that, Mario Testino, or who took those
I
pictures?
forgot who took those pictures.
But there was nothing flashy about them.
There's nothing flashy about them. They're just nice and authentic images of the royal couple, like shot in natural light.
Yeah.
And as soon as I saw them, I was like, dude, every photography outlet is gonna crap all over these. Yeah. Every photographer is gonna be up in arms. And I tried to come out and be like, dude, do you guys even understand what the royal couple might want? Like, they might want approachable images. Like, can you imagine the royal couple standing there and he's got his suit and they're dressed up and he's lit with like a hard dramatic light and it's this crazy epic shot? I was like, have you ever thought, like, if you're the royal couple, maybe what you want is approachability, because your life and lifestyle might already be perceived as being so different and so dramatically crazy from ours,
yes,
that what you want is something that brings you back to something that we can relate to. And I thought, if that was what they told the photographer, which I'm sure they did, then he or she did an incredible job doing it. And I felt like the images were authentic, they were in the moment, but none of that is considered. For some reason, it goes back to the exact same arguments every single time, which is what we're talking about here. And what we're trying to say is, your job, the photography industry is again changing. Your job will always be intact if you see the way it's changing and you don't get stuck up in the kind of elitist mentality of, like, you know, quality and lens choices and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, it was another funny industry that kind of reminds me of this is music. Do you remember how or even like coffee? Coffee might even be a better example. Can you tell the difference between like a good versus a great cup of coffee?
I don't think I can. Like, I could probably tell the difference between an awful cup of coffee. But I've been in situations where we've had awful cups of coffee next to great cups of coffee.
You did a contest.
And yeah, we did a taste testing contest and with 50 people, and I would say more than 70% of us couldn't tell the difference at all.
Yeah.
It's like this thing that's planted in your head.
Yeah. I have a couple people in our studio, as well as a couple friends that are very staunch, like, coffee elitists. And for them, if you don't know how to do like a really great pour over where you drip it in like one drop at a time, right, and you do this all, like, if it's not that, it's complete utter garbage.
Yeah.
Like, just like, I just can't believe you would put
your
that in your body.
Your grinder's not the right kind of grinder. It didn't get the grinds 100% perfect.
But they'll spend 30 minutes on doing this. Now, for me, for the average consumer, maybe their taste buds can actually differentiate that level of sophistication. I don't know. I think they're full of it. But for me, like, I can't. Maybe I could tell a really bad cup from a great cup. But like, good to great is all the same. What I value more is time. And it takes them 30 minutes to make one of these cups of coffee, or however long it takes, versus like getting something consistent each and every time from Starbucks. They always crap all over Starbucks.
Right.
I'm like, Starbucks, it's quick, it's easy, and make a good cup of coffee.
There's this underlying element to this whole thing that we're talking about right now, where it comes down more towards the user. It's the person who enjoys the process of making coffee. It's the person who may or may not hear the difference in vinyl, but they like to play vinyl.
Yeah.
You know, it's the difference in, what's another good example? I'm a guitar player. You probably can't hear on the stage the difference between that expensive amp and all that expensive guitar, but like, you might be able to feel it a little bit more in your fingers. The audience can't tell a difference, but like, you can. And so there's an element of that, and I think a lot of photographers experience this too, where just by shooting on the newest camera with 50 megapixels, somehow it makes them feel, maybe they're a landscape photographer and they're very meticulous about how they set everything up and they check the focus, and knowing that you have the best, like, it's not necessarily making a better photograph. And in fact, if they're a bad photographer, it still might be a horrible photo, but there's something there that satisfies their soul. And it's the same, I hear this with film. I don't understand shooting film. It seems like a worse way of doing things. But when I talk to film photographers, it's the same way. They like to load the film and they like to think through before they hit that shutter. And they love that whole process. And so maybe that's only 10% of it, and you would say, if you're a coffee drinker, then like, what does it matter? Save the time. But there's a lot of people that really do appreciate that element and whatever craft it is that they have grown to love.
And I have no problem with that, because what you're saying is that you're buying the gear for yourself, and you're like, if you want to go buy a 100 megapixel camera for yourself, do it, because you enjoy it and you appreciate it. Just don't fool yourself into thinking that your clients care.
Yeah.
When in all these areas, you play to your audience, and that's what you were saying, is you play to the audience. And another good example of that was, I kind of did an experiment with this last challenge, and I had several different images, and I had a theory. Like, I felt like I knew of my images that I had shot, I knew which ones I thought photographers would like the most.
Yeah.
And I intentionally submitted an image that I knew my clients would absolutely love. Like brides back in California, any portrait client back in California is all about that. But I was like, I wonder if photographers are going to be about that. If they're going to see like...
it backfired.
Yeah, it completely... No, photographers are all about... So when we were in Profoto Alaska, we did a competition, and all we said was, let's play to the audience. Our audience, our judges, was Profoto. Let's take an image that will make Profoto select us.
Yeah.
And even though it was dumb and silly, we ended up winning.
We won, yeah.
So if you can always remember, like, hey, you know what? I appreciate these things, and I'm buying these things, and I'm doing these things because that's for me, and not fool yourself into the asinine thought and argument that this is for my clients.
Yeah.
Then more power to you. You should have your amp and your special guitars because they make you feel. But your music, you know, how many great musicians could pick up whatever you have and just.
I know this is getting long. We'll probably wrap this up soon here. But one area where I know that I waste a lot of time in this is the retouching. Mm-hmm. Have you ever gone in and just started retouching skin like anyone would ever see? You know, and it's like the more megapixels you get, the deeper you go in, and it's like, man, you spend an hour or two or half a day, whatever it is. And you're like, this image is perfect, and then you upload it, and nobody ever sees it. But like, you know that it's there. You know, if you could somehow zoom in,
that
like
kills me, dude. That kills me.
But there's a lot of people that suffer the same thing. Like, I'm trying to get better with it and just not care. But a lot of people, I mean, especially retouchers, like that's what they do. They spend their whole afternoon retouching everything. And then it's for stuff that nobody ever will see because it's never published that large.
Maybe we can finish with one photography tip. I have a tip for that.
Okay.
I think I learned this from Pratik, actually.
Okay.
And what we do is we always make sure that on screen, you just size your image to whatever device or output you think most likely will be used. So if you think most likely people are just going to look at this on their phones or on whatever, you just shrink the size down to, like, let's say 50%. It still could be somewhat decently sized. Like if it's your blog, you shrink it down that big, and then you retouch it based on that size. If you can't see it, don't touch it.
Yeah. Until you need to then go back and use that image for some
other.
Yeah,
if you're going to blow it up, then go back and retouch it again. Like you can always open up, especially if it's on layers, you can always open it up and just go and add another layer and go in deeper. So
I know this was a little bit of a ramble. We kind of went all over the place. I guess I would like to know what people in our community think, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to agree with some of the stuff we're saying. And then a lot of people are going to be like, you're absolutely crazy. It does matter if you got it right in camera, and lighting does matter, and you shouldn't dodge and burn it all in Photoshop, and the phone's never going to replace, you know, the medium format camera. I'm not so sure I know anymore. I don't know that I see it moving in a direction, but I don't know where ultimately we will wind up. But what's exciting about all of this is I feel like the photograph is still as valuable or more valuable than ever. There's more money and more jobs, and the industry is bigger as a whole. And that's super exciting. But on the flip side, I guess I get a little depressed when I see every portrait of a super hot girl who's shot at 1.4 on an 85 millimeter, and they're all going after the bokeh with the dodging and the burning and the color grade. I get a little bummed out when I just feel like sometimes maybe the creativity in the largest percentage of photographers is kind of not as interesting as I would like to think it would be.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
You go back to those photo books of the 90s, and they do crazy stuff, and you're like, man, that's pretty exciting.
But in the end, if you're shooting for yourself and you're shooting the things that make you happy, I feel like you'll find the audience that also appreciates that, and you'll find your niche.
Yeah. And the nice thing is everybody has an audience now.
Yeah.
You may not have an audience, but you're able to make an audience.
You have a platform.
You're able to, you know, it's just like music. You have the ability to publish anything now, where before there was such a huge barrier.
For sure.
You know, if you wanted a music video, like who could afford to do that? Now you can make a music video for every song you write, you know? It's not hard. So Really interesting. Is there anything you have to plug? Do you have anything cool going on in photo world or elsewhere?
So we are actually releasing a new Lightroom course on editing. So it's going to be a fundamentals A to Z.
Of course, you're just making your pictures look even better.
That's right.
That software trickery.
That's the other thing. That's how I didn't win this competition. No, we actually are releasing Visual Flow. We have developed a new system for lighting condition based development for image processing.
And it seemed like what you were doing on location, I don't know if this showed through well with the video, but you're shooting things very flat, and then you're able then to automate things much quicker because you have all the data there, and you can kind of put presets on a flat image that then makes it come to life.
Yeah, I have a couple YouTube videos that'll be coming out about how we shoot, and I've always shot flat, but what lighting condition development does is like you can say, hey, we're shooting this in tungsten, so we have an automatic tungsten option for your look that adapts the scene to that lighting condition. If you're shooting soft light, hard light, if it's a high dynamic range scene. So it kind of is the closest thing that we're gonna get to like AI without like necessarily having AI select it out for you.
Yeah.
So that's what we.
But you're probably working on that soon. Robots that are literally just editing your weddings, and you have a whole warehouse full of them.
We really need those.
We really are going to be out of jobs. Cool. Well, I don't know that we have anything else. You can always go to fstoppers.com/store to check out our full length tutorials. I think you have a couple in there as well.
We do.
If you want more content like this, you can always subscribe to our channel below. And if you want daily content, head over to fstoppers.com. We have articles every single day. Also check out slrlounge.com. You guys do a very similar...
More portrait focused, but more education.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's get out of here. I'd love to hear what you guys have to think, so leave comments below, and maybe we're not as doom and gloom as I tend to think that we are.
I'm feeling good about things.
You're feeling pretty good. I'm kind of like...
Patrick needs a drink right now.
What's happening with the industry?